好，时间差不多了。那这一场议程，这个是这一场是伏击商，那要来讲的是这个 MongoDB to Postgres 的。那as far as I know, FairyDB is a MongoDB interface to Postgres.
Yeah, open source alternative to MongoDB.
So let's see what happens for this topic. Pause.
Well, thanks for introduction, and thanks COSCAP for hosting me. How many of you here use Postgres? Yes, it's a Postgres talk, I expect that. How many of you use MongoDB? I'm a bit surprised, but yeah, I think this talk is going to be quite interesting for those of you who use Postgres or MongoDB. So I'm going to talk about turning MongoDB into open standard and using Postgres for that. I'm Chi from FairyDB, and FairyDB is an open source alternative to MongoDB. So a lot of people ask, so why do you need alternative to MongoDB? Well, there's users who chose open source database. They chose MongoDB. And I'm going to talk a bit more in detail, but MongoDB changed its license to SSPL license, which is not an open source license. So those users who chose open source database as their main database found themselves in a vendor lock-in. And we think we can replace that with Postgres. So in this talk, I'm going to talk a bit about licensing of MongoDB and history of SQL as an open standard, and the MongoDB query language as an open standard, and I'll talk a bit about FairyDB and its architecture, and I'll conclude. So this graph here is a survey from the Stack Exchange Developer Survey from 2014, a small portion of it which regarding the databases. And it asks, which database environments have you done extensive development work in over the past year, and which one do you want to work in over the next year? It had 52K responses, so it's quite representative. And the question here is, which database is an outlier here? Well, some of you may already know from this talk, it's MongoDB. But why is MongoDB an outlier? So these are top 5 databases from this survey, and it's Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, and Microsoft SQL Server. They are all SQL databases, and MongoDB is the only document database. And what it means is that if you want to choose a top-tier database, you're only really left with MongoDB as option. And MongoDB is a proprietary database, unlike top 3, which are open source databases. So if you want to choose document database, top-tier database, your choices are quite limited. We often get questions, but isn't MongoDB open source? Well, MongoDB was an open source database and AGPL. But then in 2018, they changed their license to server-side public license, SSPL, which MongoDB may claim it's an open source license. It's not recognized as such by open source organizations such as OSI initiative. The reason is it discriminates use case. So in AGPL, if you modify program and use it as a service, you have to provide access to source code. In SSPL, if you use MongoDB or modified code and provide it as a service, you have to publish entire stack under SSPL license. The entire stack here means your management software, your automation software, monitoring software, backup software, storage software. You might, be a bit aware that you may not have access to this source code, and which means it's not feasible to license them under SSPL for some users. The alternative is you have to pay license fee. This doesn't, seem like how open source or any open source software should work, right? But majority of people are users. They're not cloud service providers, so why would you care? There's actually a good reason why you should care, because there's limited providers. These providers have to pay license fee to MongoDB, or you have to use MongoDB Atlas. So there's less providers in the market. There's less competition, and less competition means higher the price, and it kills the innovation, and it also creates vendor lock-in. Once you choose the provider, it's very difficult to move away. The very clause that they use to prevent service provider from using MongoDB without getting a license is that offering a service that accomplishes for users the primary purpose of the program or modified version, which also takes away the freedom of hosting for users as well. You have to select MongoDB Atlas or providers who pay license to MongoDB. There's this website called ssplisbad.com. I don't know who made this, but this explains SSPL quite well. So because I'm doing the talk in Postgres session, many users ask, so why not just use Postgres with JSON? Postgres has great JSON support. While it may be feasible, reality is harder than you think. So MongoDB has a great large ecosystem, many JS frameworks, stacks, and the tooling around it is built around MongoDB compatibility, which means that it's not just about rewriting application. You have to learn all of the tooling too, and the developer knowledge that was developed around MongoDB is, they have to relearn those skill set. So for many organizations, using Postgres with JSON is not a feasible approach. So let's take a step back and see what happened to SQL history, because I think it's quite relevant to what's happening into the document database space at the moment. So, well, SQL does have a long history, but what I'm going to talk about is a very compact, short version of it. So SQL and the relational database both developed at IBM. So Edgar F. Tedcott developed relational model at IBM Research Labs. Relational models that we are all very familiar with, using tables, rows, and columns. While this was a groundbreaking model discovery, the first query language, which was also developed by Edgar F. Tedcott, relational algebra, was very complex to use. So you had to be a hardcore developer or mathematician to use relational model. So some other colleagues at IBM, Don Chamberlain and Ray Boyce, saw this problem, and they developed English-like query language, which became foundation of SQL we know now today. And with SQL access to relational model became a lot easier, so even non-developer can use relational model and SQL. But if you wanted to use SQL and the relational model at the very beginning in late 70s, IBM was the only provider who had SQL product. Some of you may be aware IBM DB2, which meant that if you wanted to use SQL, you had to lease one of these huge machines, and there were no other commercially available product for using SQL. So does this sound like kind of similar story now? If you want to use MongoDB query language, you have to lease, well, not lease, but you have to use Atlas, MongoDB Atlas. Well, so then a lot of alternatives started popping up in 80s. Informix had their own relational software system. Inc., which is nowadays known as Oracle, had their own implementation. Sybase had their own. They were all very great products, but the feature sets were different. Often the language was different. They tried to mimic the behavior of IBM DB2 to implement SQL, or they came up with their own idea of how SQL should work. So while these are really great products, once you chose one, you couldn't migrate away from one another, so it's meant vendor lock-in. And of course, there were no conformity between these products. Then vendors, users, community, developers, they all came together to establish an open standard for SQL, which established the core set of features to be implemented for SQL, how it should behave, and how you should implement SQL. And now, anyone can implement SQL. And of course, you can add the feature on top of the core features as a standard extension. Still, all the vendors were proprietary. But this was a great community effort to write a standard. Then, in mid-90s and early 2000, open source projects started picking up, implementing SQL, like Postgres, MySQL, SQLite. So if you had computer, anyone could implement SQL, and anyone could use SQL. And SQL became what it is today, you know. You can't imagine database without SQL. And there has been hundreds of derivatives since then. So I said this is kind of related to what's happening in open document database space. So is it things of the past that you have to lease, you know, machines from a company to use the technology you want to use, MongoDB query language? Well, in fact, it's a reality for many developers of document databases. They can't select where they want to host. They have to limit to the available cloud providers. They have, or MongoDB Atlas. They could use MongoDB Community Edition, which is less feature-rich, but still you can't use it as a service. MongoDB has a quite similar idea. You don't need to be a developer to run database. Just like SQL, you didn't need to be a developer. You don't need to be a DBA to run database, just like SQL. And the users who chose open source database, they chose MongoDB, and MongoDB is now no longer open source. So this slide looks quite similar. Of course, the providers are different, but it's almost like you replaced SQL with MongoDB query language, MQL. Again, these products are all great. They're all proprietary. They implement different set of features, and they're not compatible to each other, meaning that once you chose one of them, you are stuck with it. Migration between them is hard if it's possible. So I talked about behavior is different. Let me go through some example of behaviors that makes it difficult for alternative to implement. So this is a very simple query. Well, it's kind of a JavaScript-like syntax. So it inserts a timestamp of 0. What do you think it stores in the database? Well, it's not 0, right? Because I'm showing it as an example. So it actually stores current timestamp. And between different alternatives, it behaves differently. And some compatible products depend on it. But without standard, there's no rules. Sorting. So this example has 3 documents. And it sorts by field V, using ascending sort. So 1 means ascending sort. So what this shows is if you use ascending sort, empty array is smaller than null. Null is smaller than array with null. What if you use descending sort? If you sort by larger ones first. Well, some might expect it's opposite order, but it's not. These are the behaviors that makes it quite hard for alternatives to implement. And myself, I haven't quite figured out why it's this way, even still. So issue, or let's say challenge with MongoDB alternatives is that MongoDB sets the pace. Either it's the behavior. What if MongoDB deprecates the feature? Do alternatives deprecate the feature too? What if MongoDB add new feature? Do all the alternatives share the same roadmap? Well, tricky, right? The alternatives have similar language, query language, but they don't have a core set of features they share. So that means compatibility, degree of compatibility is different. Some tooling, some framework may work with one alternative, but not with other. And migration between them is very hard, if it's possible. And at the moment, all are proprietary vendors, and most are tied to cloud providers. So we are in need for open standard for document database. So in this open standard for MongoDB query language, a standardized core set of feature based on MongoDB. And that would be JSON-like query language. And of course, it can be extended at the expense of portability, just like it is in SQL. This ensures compatibility between products. This ensures portability between products, and of course compatibility too, which means you can migrate away from one product to another. And it can be extended just like SQL. And this stimulates innovation and increased competition, just like it did for SQL when open source projects started picking up SQL. And that's really great for users. So what have we done so far? So FerretDB is a MongoDB compatibility layer on top of Postgres and DocumentDB. It's written in Go, and you can use it on-prem or in cloud. It's released under Apache 2.0. So MongoDB compatibility means that existing element of Mongo's DB ecosystem, like tools, frameworks, and application, are possible to use FerretDB. And they won't even notice most of the case that it's using FerretDB. So that means skill set of developer stays where it is. And also, MongoDB compatibility means it's the freedom to migrate away from MongoDB. So it doesn't leave you in vendor lock-in. So MongoDB drivers are one of the main reasons behind high adaptation of MongoDB. It provides smooth experience you get with MongoDB. And the drivers are licensed under Apache 2.0. And MongoDB backend, MongoDB API, and WireTiger storage engine, they are licensed under SSPL. So many other proprietary vendors, they replaced it their own of their compatible implementation. So FerretDB replaces MongoDB with FerretDB and Postgres with DocumentDB extension. So Postgres is licensed under Postgres license, and DocumentDB is licensed under MIT, which makes entire experience open source. And that's one of the reasons we want to use Postgres. So let's talk a bit about FerretDB. So FerretDB accepts MongoDB query, and internally we do a lot of things like metrics and stuff, and then converts into a SQL query to access Postgres with DocumentDB extension. It also built in mind of migration, testing, and debugging. So FerretDB can forward query to MongoDB compatible product. So this can be the MongoDB you are actually using, or the alternatives you want to migrate away from, or just for testing for fun. FerretDB also provides data API, which allows you to access through HTTP. So I talked a little bit about FerretDB can forward request. So FerretDB has a few operation mode. Of course, you can just process your request, incoming request by FerretDB, which stores and query to Postgres. Or you can forward request to MongoDB compatible database, proxy we call it. Or you can forward request to both FerretDB and MongoDB compatible database. This is quite helpful during migration. You can then log the difference using this mode. So for example, this is an example of logs for what's my URL query of MongoDB. And they have different URL. So interesting thing about FerretDB is FerretDB can turn Postgres into MongoDB compatible database. So for Postgres as a service provider, just by running FerretDB can turn them into a MongoDB compatible database provider as well. And this was the very thing SSPL did not allow. So FerretDB and Microsoft Document DB team worked together over a year to release FerretDB 2.0, which uses the same engine as Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB. So FerretDB 2.0 is largely compatible with Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB. And this is a great step, big step towards standardization, making migration between those two possible. OpenDocDB.org is a community-led push for standardization of document databases. It provides compatibility test suites with to identify core features. You can use MongoDB alternative product like FerretDB, like Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB, like AWS Document DB to identify the compliance of the feature set. The idea here is to certify the compatibility first and then write the standard later. And this is supported by many companies in the community. So we are in need for open standard for document database. And we think MongoDB will be a commodity just like how SQL was. And I think it's great for industry. And FerretDB is leading the way to open up document database market. And we are building FerretDB with the community. And we are looking for experts and providers to work with us, join our effort. And if you want to join our effort, try FerretDB, visit our GitHub. Our roadmap is also public, and we are available on our community Slack. And thank you.
Hi, hello. Oh, hello, my name is Kenny. I want to know if I want to migrate online MongoDB to VeraDB without any downtime, would you have any suggestion?
Well, that is a definitely very good question. It's depend on case by cases too. I'm assuming you are using MongoDB Atlas.
No.
No. Okay.
Self-host.
Yeah. Reach out to us because we are very interested in listening real user story of the what's the challenge, and do get in touch with us as well. I think it would be quite interesting to find out what's your actual need.
Oh, okay. Another question is about because our online MongoDB is a horizontal sharding cluster. So if I want to move to VeraDB, VeraDB support any scaling, horizontal scaling for Postgres, or I need to manually integrate like a Citus or another distributed database for Postgres.
So do you know Yugabyte DB?
Yeah,
so Yugabyte DB, we are working with Yugabyte DB to have a FerretDB on Yugabyte DB, and we have a beta version, so that might be your interest as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for Fujii-san.